Some folks say animals don't remember kindness, but they're wrong as rain. The phone's shrill cry cut through Abigail Whitehorse's morning coffee like a blade through silence. 6:30 a.m. And Daniel Crowfeather's voice carried that edge she'd learned to dread over 30 years of veterinary work. "Abby, you need to come now. That bobcat. She's back. And she's got something." Her coffee mug hit the kitchen counter with a sharp crack. 3 years. 3 years since she'd patched up that wild female with the amber eyes and distinctive ear notch. 3 years since Sarah's funeral. Since she'd sworn off the heartbreak of caring too much. What kind of something? Daniel. Something that's dying. Abby. She's standing on your clinic porch with a kitten in her mouth. And she ain't moving. Been there all night, waiting for you. The line went dead. Outside. Oklahoma thunder rolled across the hills like God's own warning. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The gravel crunched under Abigail's boots as she pulled up to her clinic, the old Cherokee Nation veterinary practice her grandfather had built with his own hands. Dawn was breaking over the Oklahoma hills, painting the sky the color of old blood. And there she was, exactly where Daniel had said she'd be. The bobcat sat motionless on the wooden porch steps, a small bundle of gray and tan fur cradled gently in her powerful jaws. Even from 30 feet away, Abby could see the distinctive notch in the cat's left ear, the scar along her shoulder where metal had met flesh 3 years ago. Sage. That's what Sarah had called her, though Abby had never used the name aloud. "Well, I'll be damned," Abby whispered, stepping slowly from her truck. "You do remember." Sage's amber eyes tracked every movement. But she didn't flee. The kitten in her mouth hung limp, its tiny chest barely moving. Blood matted the baby's fur, and one small leg jutted at an angle that made Abby's stomach clench. Time was running short, maybe an hour, 2 at most. Daniel emerged from behind the clinic, his weathered face creased with worry. "She's been here since midnight. Abby. Mrs. Running Bear saw her on her way home from the casino. Won't eat, won't drink, won't move, except to adjust that baby's position." "Lord have mercy," Abby breathed, remembering her grandmother's words about animals who sought human help. It happened maybe once in a lifetime, if you were blessed enough to earn that kind of trust. The controversial part came when Daniel spoke again. Called the wildlife folks in Tulsa. They can't get a truck out here till tomorrow morning. What with the storm coming in, said to contain the animals and wait. That baby will be dead by tomorrow. Abby's voice carried the steel her Cherokee ancestors had passed down through generations of surviving impossible odds. Sage brought him to me for a reason. Abby, you know the regulations. The good Lord helps those who help themselves. Daniel. She opened her medical bag, hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. And sometimes he sends a desperate mother to remind us what really matters. Sage shifted slightly, lowering the kitten to the porch boards, but keeping her massive paws protectively around the small body. Those intelligent eyes seemed to say what Abby's heart already knew. Some bridges between species were built on something deeper than law or regulation. Thunder rumbled closer, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Whatever happened next, there'd be no turning back once she crossed that porch. Some choices, her grandfather used to say, define the measure of a person's soul. Abigail Whitehorse had already lost one child to circumstance beyond her control. She'd be damned if she'd lose another. 3 years earlier, September 15th, 2021, the phone call came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other, with Sarah bouncing down the stairs in her favorite purple sneakers and braided pigtails, chattering about the science project on animal habitats she was presenting that afternoon. "Mom, did you know bobcats can jump 12 feet high? That's like jumping over our whole kitchen." Sarah's 8-year-old enthusiasm filled their breakfast nook as she wolfed down her cereal, milk dribbling down her chin. Fascinating, baby girl. Abby had been reviewing case files, half listening to her daughter's endless stream of animal facts. Always animals with Sarah. The girl could recite the scientific names of every creature in Oklahoma, but couldn't remember to put her dirty clothes in the hamper. "Mrs. Patterson says I might win the science fair if I can get real pictures of a bobcat den. You think we could go looking this weekend? We'll see, sweetheart. Mama's got 3 surgeries scheduled Saturday." The lie came easily. Truth was, Abby had been avoiding the wilderness since her parents died in that hiking accident 5 years prior. Too many memories lurked in those hills. Sarah's face had fallen, but she'd kissed Abby's cheek anyway. "Love you to the moon and back, Mama. Love you to the stars and beyond, baby girl." Those were the last words they'd ever exchange. The call came from Riverside Elementary's principal. There'd been an accident. A drunk driver running a red light. Sarah's school bus, returning from a field trip to the Cherokee Heritage Center, had been broadsided. 3 children and the driver were in critical condition at St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa. Abby remembered the 90-minute drive as a blur of flashing emergency lights and desperate prayers. She'd called Emma from the truck, her sister's voice breaking over the phone from Dallas. "I'm catching the first flight out. Abby, she's going to be fine." Sarah's tough as nails, just like Mama was. But Sarah wasn't fine. The little girl who could name every bird species in Oklahoma lay unconscious in a sterile hospital room. Machines beeping their mechanical prayers while doctors spoke in hushed tones about brain swelling and uncertain outcomes. For 6 days, Abby lived in that hospital chair, holding Sarah's small hand and reading aloud from her daughter's favorite books about animals. "The Wild Robot," "Where the Red Fern Grows," "Charlotte's Web," stories about creatures who loved and sacrificed and found family in unexpected places. On the 7th day, at 2:23 a.m., Sarah opened her eyes one last time. "Mama, are the animals okay?" "What animals?" "Baby girl. The ones by the creek. They need help." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes struggling to focus. "Promise me you'll help them. I promise, sweetheart. I promise." Sarah smiled, squeezed Abby's hand with what little strength remained, and closed her eyes forever. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences, of Emma's fierce hugs and Daniel's quiet presence. The Cherokee tradition called for 4 days of mourning, but Abby's grief stretched into weeks, then months. She couldn't bear to return to the clinic, couldn't stand the thought of healing when her own heart lay shattered beyond repair. But on a cold October morning, exactly 1 month after Sarah's death, Daniel appeared at her door with urgency written across his weathered features. "Abby, I know you're grieving, but there's an injured bobcat down by Willow Creek. Been there 3 days now, and she's in bad shape. Wildlife folks won't come out for another week. I can't. Daniel, I just can't. She's got babies. Abby. I can hear them crying. Sarah's last words echoed in Abby's mind. Promise me you'll help them. The bobcat was magnificent, even in her suffering. She lay partially hidden beneath a fallen oak, her tawny coat matted with blood from a deep gash along her shoulder, probably from barbed wire, judging by the clean edges. Her amber eyes held intelligence and wariness in equal measure, but also something else, resignation. Easy, girl, Abby whispered, approaching slowly with her medical bag. I'm here to help. The bobcat growled low in her throat but didn't try to flee. Perhaps she understood that she was dying, that her cubs would perish without intervention. Or perhaps, and this thought would haunt Abby for years to come, perhaps Sarah had somehow sent this creature to pull her mother back from the brink of self-destruction. The surgery took 4 hours in Abby's makeshift field clinic. Clean the wound, stitch the deep lacerations, administer antibiotics and pain medication. The bobcat sage. Sarah's voice, whispered in her memory, remained surprisingly calm throughout the procedure, as if she understood that this human meant no harm. Emma arrived as Abby was finishing the final sutures. What the hell are you doing out here? Abby! You haven't answered your phone in 2 days. I thought... Emma stopped short when she saw the unconscious bobcat. Jesus Christ. You're operating on wild animals now in the middle of nowhere. She needed help. She's a predator, Abby, and you're out here alone, playing God with some dangerous wild animal instead of... Emma's voice cracked. Instead of dealing with your grief like a normal person. There is no normal anymore, Emma. Normal died with Sarah. Sarah wouldn't want this for you, hiding from people, living like some hermit, risking your life for creatures that would kill you without a second thought. But Emma was wrong, and Abby knew it with the certainty that comes from a mother's broken heart. Sarah would have understood perfectly. Sarah, who'd spent her brief life cataloging every creature in their corner of Oklahoma, who died asking about the animals by the creek. When Sage woke up 3 days later, she fixed those amber eyes on Abby with what could only be described as recognition. Not the blank stare of a wild animal, but the knowing gaze of one soul acknowledging another's kindness. For 2 weeks, Abby tended to the recovering bobcat, bringing food and checking the healing wounds. Sage never tried to attack, never showed aggression beyond the necessary wariness of her species. On the morning Abby removed the final stitches, the bobcat touched her nose briefly to Abby's hand, a gesture so unexpected and gentle that tears sprang to her eyes. Then Sage vanished into the wilderness, leaving only paw prints in the soft earth and a profound sense of connection that Abby couldn't quite explain. Emma never understood. You saved one animal, Abby. That doesn't bring Sarah back. That doesn't... But it wasn't about bringing Sarah back. It was about honoring the promise made to a dying child, about finding purpose in a world that had suddenly become meaningless. In caring for Sage, Abby had discovered that healing others could begin to heal herself. Now, 3 years later, standing on her clinic porch with Sage's desperate amber eyes pleading for help once again, Abby understood with crystalline clarity that some bonds transcend species, and some promises echo across time until they find their way home. The circle was completing itself. and Sarah's last request was about to be fulfilled in ways neither mother nor daughter could have imagined. The kitten's breathing was so shallow that Abby had to press her ear close to his tiny chest to confirm he was still alive. Each breath came in ragged gasps, his small rib cage fluttering like a dying bird's wing. She worked quickly but gently, her experienced hands moving over the small body, while Sage watched from 3 feet away, every muscle tensed with maternal anxiety. "Daniel, I need you to hold the light steady," Abby murmured, pulling on latex gloves. The storm clouds were thickening overhead, stealing what little natural light remained. "And keep talking to Sage. Your voice seems to calm her." Daniel positioned the battery-powered lantern and began speaking in low Cherokee, words his grandmother had taught him about the sacred bond between humans and the animal world. Sage's ears twitched at the familiar cadence, but her amber eyes never left her injured baby. Abby's initial examination revealed internal bleeding, evident from the kitten's pale gums and distended abdomen. A broken rib had likely punctured something vital. Without immediate surgery, the little one would be dead within the hour. The nearest wildlife rehabilitation center was 3 hours away on good roads, impossible in the approaching storm. "This is bad, Daniel. Real bad." Abby's voice carried the weight of 30 years of veterinary experience. "He needs surgery now, not tomorrow, not in 6 hours, now. You going to operate here on the porch?" "In the clinic. My equipment's limited, but I've got enough to stabilize him if we're lucky." She paused, watching Sage's protective posture. "The controversial part is that by state law, I should be transporting him to licensed wildlife facilities. What I'm about to do could cost me my license." Daniel's weathered face creased with understanding. "Sometimes doing right ain't the same as doing legal." As Abby carefully lifted the kitten, something caught her attention, a flash of faded blue around his neck, nearly hidden by matted fur. Working gently, she exposed a frayed nylon collar, the kind sold in pet stores across America. Most of the fabric had rotted away, but a small metal tag still clung to the buckle. "Well, I'll be damned," she whispered, squinting at the corroded engraving. The letters were barely visible, worn by weather and time, but she could make out enough to send a chill down her spine. "What is it?" Daniel leaned closer, holding the light steady. "This kitten's got a collar. A pet collar." Abby's voice carried disbelief. "Someone owned this animal. Daniel. Someone named him and put an identification tag on him." She angled the tag toward the light, trying to decipher the faded engraving. The first word was clear enough, though it made her heart skip hope. The rest was too corroded to read, but the implications were staggering. Sage made a soft chuffing sound, as if responding to the name. Her behavior throughout the morning had been unusual for a wild animal, too trusting, too comfortable with human presence. Now Abby wondered if the mother bobcat had once known human care herself. "People don't just put collars on wild bobcats," Daniel observed, his practical mind working through the possibilities. "Either this little one escaped from somewhere, or he was raised by humans and released," Abby finished the thought, her medical training warring with the illegal implications. "Which would explain why Sage brought him here. She knows humans can help because humans helped her before." Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now, and the first fat raindrops began to spatter on the clinic's metal roof, They needed to move inside before the storm hit in earnest. But Sage showed no inclination to follow them indoors. Wild animals, even trusting ones, had limits to their comfort with human spaces. "Sage girl, we need to take Hope inside," Abby said gently, using the name from the collar. The bobcat's ears perked up at the sound, confirming Abby's suspicion that the kitten had been called by that name before. What happened next defied everything Abby knew about wild animal behavior. Sage rose slowly, approached the clinic door, and sat down directly in front of it, not fleeing, not showing aggression, but clearly indicating her intention to remain as close as possible to her baby. "She's going to wait," Daniel said with amazement. "A wild bobcat is going to sit outside a human building and wait while you operate on her kitten." The surgery itself was touch and go from the first incision, working in her small clinic with equipment designed for domestic animals. Abby carefully opened Hope's abdomen to assess the internal damage. The broken rib had indeed punctured his small intestine, causing the bleeding that threatened his life. "How's Sage doing?" Abby asked during a particularly delicate moment of suturing intestinal tissue. Daniel peered through the window. "Still there. Hasn't moved an inch. Rain's coming down hard now, but she's just sitting in it, watching the door." The dedication was heartbreaking. Most wild animals would have fled at the first sign of a storm, seeking shelter in familiar territory. But Sage remained, soaked to the skin, her maternal instincts overriding every survival mechanism evolution had given her. As Abby worked to repair the internal damage, her mind churned with questions. Who had owned Hope originally? How had he ended up in the wild? And most troubling of all, why did the scenario feel eerily familiar, like a puzzle piece clicking into place in a picture she couldn't quite see? 2 hours into the surgery, as she was closing the abdominal incision, Abby's portable scanner began beeping. The device, designed to read microchips in domestic animals, had detected something embedded beneath Hope's skin. "That's impossible," she muttered, running the scanner along the kitten's shoulder. "Wild animals don't have microchips." But the scanner's display showed otherwise, a 15-digit identification number registered in the American Animal Hospital Association database. With growing unease, Abby connected her scanner to her laptop and ran the number through the National Pet Recovery System. The results appeared on screen, and the surgical instruments slipped from Abby's suddenly nerveless fingers. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Daniel, you need to see this." The registration information was sparse but devastating. Owner Sarah Whitehorse, pet name Hope, species bobcat. Lynx rufus, registration date September 10, 2021. Address 147 Cherokee Hills Road. Stillwell. Okay. Daniel read over her shoulder, his sharp intake of breath confirming that she wasn't hallucinating. "That's 5 days before Sarah died. Abby. 5 days." The timeline crashed into Abby's consciousness like a physical blow. Sarah had secretly registered a bobcat kitten in the pet recovery database just days before the accident, had been keeping him as a pet, hidden from her mother who was too busy with work to notice, had died trying to protect not just the animals by the creek, but her own secret companion. "She knew," Abby whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the unconscious kitten on her operating table. "Sarah knew I'd never approve, so she kept him secret." And when the accident happened, Hope got out, Daniel finished gently. Probably scared, looking for Sarah. Sage must have found him, took him in as her own. The emotional weight nearly buckled Abby's knees. For 3 years, she'd mourned her daughter while unknowingly caring for the wild mother who'd been raising Sarah's secret pet. The connection between them, the unusual trust, the comfortable coexistence, had been built on shared love for the same little girl. Outside, Sage's mournful call rose above the storm's fury, a sound of loss and longing that echoed in Abby's shattered heart. The bobcat mother had been grieving too, caring for the orphaned kitten of a human child who would never come home. As Abby completed the surgery with trembling hands, she understood with crystalline clarity that some bonds transcend species. Some love stories span the gap between wild and tame, and sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected places. Hope was more than just a wounded animal. He was the living link between a mother's guilt and a daughter's secret kindness, between the wild world Sarah had loved and the mother who had been too afraid to share in that love. The surgery was successful, but the real work of healing was just beginning. The microchip revelation hit Abby like a physical blow, but the real earthquake came when she pulled up Sarah's full registration record on her laptop. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the detailed information her daughter had somehow managed to input into the system. Emergency contact number 1. Abigail Whitehorse. Mom, veterinarian. Emergency contact number 2. Sage Bobcat. Mom, lives by Willow Creek. Special instructions. Hope loves strawberries and sleeps with my teddy bear. If something happens to me, please make sure Mom knows I learned about helping animals from watching her. She's the best animal doctor in the whole world, even when she's too busy to notice. The words blurred through Abby's tears. Sarah had been 8 years old when she created this record, yet somehow she'd understood that something might happen to her. More devastating still was the realization that Sarah had listed Sage by name as a secondary emergency contact, complete with location details. "Daniel, look at this." Abby's voice cracked as she turned the laptop screen toward him. "Sarah knew about Sage. She'd been watching me care for her after the surgery, learning from it, and she somehow convinced someone to let her register a wild animal as a pet." Daniel studied the screen, his weathered face grave. "That Cherokee Heritage Center field trip the day of the accident. They've got a wildlife rehabilitation program there. Bet you anything that's where she learned about the microchip system." The timeline was devastating in its clarity. Sarah's last field trip had been to learn about animal conservation. She'd probably asked a dozen questions about helping injured wildlife, absorbing every detail with the passionate curiosity that had defined her short life. Then she'd gone home and created this record, somehow knowing that the secret kitten she'd been caring for might need official protection someday. But the most heartbreaking entry was the final one. Mom doesn't know about Hope yet, because she's sad about Grandma and Grandpa. But when she's ready, I'm going to show her how smart he is, and maybe she'll love animals again like she used to. "She was protecting me," Abby whispered, understanding flooding through her like cold water. "She knew I'd been avoiding the wilderness, avoiding anything that reminded me of my parents' accident. So she kept Hope secret until she thought I was ready." The surgical instruments lay forgotten on the steel table as Abby absorbed the full weight of her daughter's love and sacrifice. For months after Sarah's death, she'd blamed herself for not knowing her child completely. for missing signs, for being too absorbed in work to truly connect. Now she realized that Sarah had been protecting her mother's fragile emotional state with the wisdom of someone far beyond her 8 years. Daniel's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Tom Bradley from Fish and Wildlife. Probably heard about our situation." "Don't answer it," Abby said quickly. "Not yet. I need time to process this." But the controversy was just beginning. As word spread through their small community about the unusual rescue, other calls started coming in. The Cherokee Nation Wildlife Department wanted to inspect the situation. The State Veterinary Board had questions about unlicensed treatment of native species. And somewhere in Tulsa, Emma was probably fielding calls from reporters who'd heard about the miracle bobcat story. The surgical recovery was proceeding better than expected. Hope's vital signs had stabilized, and the internal bleeding had been successfully controlled. But he remained unconscious, his small body working to heal from trauma that should have killed him. Abby monitored his breathing while grappling with the emotional tsunami of her discoveries. "We need to talk about what comes next," Daniel said gently, returning from another check on Sage. "She's still out there in the rain, hasn't moved except to shift position every hour or so. But Abby, the legal implications—" "I know." Abby's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent 3 years learning that good intentions didn't always align with legal requirements. "Sarah registered Hope illegally. I'm treating him without proper wildlife permits. And now half the state's going to want explanations." The irony wasn't lost on her. Sarah had tried to protect both Hope and her mother by working within official systems, but an 8-year-old's understanding of wildlife law had created a paper trail that could destroy Abby's career. The registration record that proved Sarah's love and foresight was also evidence of multiple regulatory violations. As if summoned by her fears, headlights appeared through the storm-lashed windows. A white SUV with Cherokee Nation Wildlife Department markings pulled up beside Abby's truck. Behind it came a second vehicle, Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. "Shit," Daniel muttered. "Tom Bradley brought backup." Abby watched through the rain-streaked window as 2 officials emerged from their vehicles, both wearing the grim expressions of people who'd driven 3 hours in a storm to deal with a problem. They paused when they saw Sage, still maintaining her vigil by the clinic door, but approached with the confident stride of professionals accustomed to managing difficult wildlife situations. The knock on the clinic door was sharp and authoritative. "Dr. Whitehorse, this is Tom Bradley, Cherokee Nation Wildlife. We need to discuss your current situation." Abby looked down at Hope, still unconscious on the surgical table, then at her laptop screen showing Sarah's heartbreaking registration record. In a few minutes, she'd have to explain how a dead 8-year-old had illegally registered a wild bobcat as a pet, how that same bobcat had been raised by another wild bobcat who'd learned to trust humans, and how 3 years of grief and healing had led to this moment of impossible choices. "Dr. Whitehorse." The voice was more insistent now. "We know you're in there. We also know you're treating native wildlife without proper authorization." Daniel moved toward the door, but Abby stopped him with a raised hand. She needed 30 more seconds to read the final entry in Sarah's registration record, a note she'd somehow missed in her initial shock. P.S. "I asked Jesus to take care of Mom if something bad happens to me. I think he'll use the animals to do it, because that's what makes Mom happiest even when she pretends it doesn't. Hope is my gift to Mom so she won't be so sad. Love, Sarah, Elizabeth Whitehorse." The theological implications of an 8-year-old's faith hit Abby like a sledgehammer. Sarah had viewed Hope not just as a pet, but as a divine instrument of healing for her grieving mother. She'd understood, with the clarity that sometimes comes to children, that her mother's true calling involved caring for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. "I'm coming," Abby called to the officials outside, her voice stronger than it had been in 3 years. Whatever legal consequences awaited, she'd face them with the knowledge that her daughter's love had orchestrated this entire impossible situation. She covered Hope with a warm blanket, made a final check of his IV line, and moved toward the door where 2 government officials waited to potentially end her career. But as her hand touched the doorknob, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Outside, Sage raised her massive head and fixed those amber eyes on the clinic door, as if she too understood that the next few minutes would determine the fate of everyone she loved. The storm was reaching its peak, but for the first time in 3 years, Abigail Whitehorse wasn't afraid of the thunder. Present day, 11:00 a.m. Tom Bradley stood in the clinic doorway, shaking rain from his uniform jacket, his weathered Cherokee features carrying the weight of someone who'd spent 20 years navigating the impossible intersection of wildlife law and human compassion. Behind him, Maria Santos from the State Wildlife Department clutched a clipboard of regulatory violations, her expression suggesting this visit was purely procedural. "Dr. Whitehorse, we've received reports of unauthorized wildlife treatment," Bradley began, then stopped short when he saw Hope on the surgical table. His official demeanor softened slightly. "Jesus, Abby, what have you gotten yourself into?" September 8th, 2021, 7:00 p.m. Sarah had been unusually quiet during dinner that evening, picking at her favorite meal of grilled cheese and tomato soup. Abby, exhausted from a difficult surgery on a German shepherd with bloat, barely noticed her daughter's subdued mood. "Mom, can we talk about something important?" Sarah had asked, her 8-year-old voice carrying an unusual gravity. "Can it wait until after I finish these case notes? Baby girl Dr. Standing Bear wants them first thing tomorrow." Sarah had nodded, disappointment flickering across her face. "Sure, Mom. It can wait." But it couldn't wait. And it wouldn't wait. And that conversation would never happen, because 3 days later, Sarah would be fighting for her life in a hospital bed. And 7 days after that, she'd be gone forever. Present day, 11:15 a.m. "The animal was dying," Abby said simply, meeting Bradley's gaze. "A wild mother brought her injured kitten to my door." "What would you have done?" Maria Santos stepped forward, clipboard at the ready. "According to state regulations, you should have contacted proper wildlife authorities and waited for appropriate transport." "What you've done here constitutes—" "What I've done here," Abby interrupted, her voice carrying 3 years of suppressed grief and newfound purpose, "is honor a promise I made to my dying daughter." She turned the laptop screen toward the officials, showing Sarah's registration record. Both Bradley and Santos leaned forward, reading in silence. The rain hammered against the windows as the full implications sank in. "Your daughter registered a wild bobcat." Santos's voice carried disbelief. That's impossible. The system requires adult verification, government ID. Sarah was 8 years old and dying, Abby said quietly. She was also the smartest, most compassionate person I've ever known. If she found a way to protect this animal legally, then she found a way. September 12th, 2021, 6:30 a.m. The call from her daughter's teacher had come just before dawn. Sarah had collapsed during the school's early bird reading program, convulsing on the classroom floor while her classmates screamed in terror. The paramedics found her unconscious, her small body racked with seizures that wouldn't stop. Brain aneurysm, the emergency room doctor had explained to Abby in the sterile hallway that smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. Probably congenital. There was nothing anyone could have done to prevent it. But Abby knew better. She'd missed the signs, the headaches Sarah had mentioned, the fatigue she'd attributed to school stress, the moments of confusion that seemed like typical 8-year-old distraction. A mother should have noticed. A veterinarian, trained to observe symptoms in creatures who couldn't speak, should have seen what was happening to her own child. Present day, 11:30 a.m. Bradley was studying Sarah's registration record with the careful attention of someone who understood the complex web of federal, state, and tribal wildlife regulations. This microchip registration, it's technically valid. Whoever helped her do this knew exactly which loopholes to exploit. The Cherokee Heritage Center, Daniel offered. Sarah's class visited their rehabilitation program the day before the accident. Someone there must have helped her. Santos looked skeptical. An 8-year-old convinced professional wildlife rehabilitators to help her illegally register a wild animal. You didn't know Sarah, Abby said, moving to check Hope's vital signs. The kitten was stirring slightly, a good sign. She could convince anyone of anything when she set her mind to it, and she understood more about animal behavior than most adults. Outside, Sage's mournful call rose above the storm. All 4 humans turned toward the sound, recognizing the primal anguish of a mother separated from her child. October 1st, 2021, 3:00 p.m. 3 weeks after Sarah's funeral. Abby had finally gathered the courage to clean out her daughter's room. She'd expected the usual 8-year-old's collection of stuffed animals, art supplies, and books about horses and dogs. What she'd found instead was a carefully organized research library, field guides to Oklahoma wildlife, detailed drawings of animal tracks and habitats, a notebook filled with observations about the creatures living around their property, written in Sarah's careful cursive. Most shocking of all was a manila folder labeled Animal Hospital Plans, containing detailed sketches of what appeared to be a wildlife rehabilitation facility. But Abby had been too raw with grief to process the implications. She'd packed everything away, unable to face the evidence of her daughter's secret passion. Only now, 3 years later, did she understand that Sarah had been preparing for a future that would never come, a future where mother and daughter worked together to heal the wounded creatures of their shared world. Present day, 11:45 a.m. Dr. Whitehorse, Santos said, her regulatory demeanor beginning to crack. Even if the registration is technically valid, you're still treating native wildlife without proper permits. The penalties for this could include suspension of your veterinary license. Then suspend it, Abby replied without hesitation. I made a promise to a dying child, and I'll keep it regardless of the consequences. Bradley held up a hand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Maria. What if we classify this as an emergency intervention? Dr. Whitehorse is a licensed veterinarian responding to a life-threatening situation. The animal should have been transported to where? Abby challenged. The nearest wildlife center is 3 hours away in good weather. That kitten would have died twice over by the time help arrived. And you're telling me I should have let him die because of paperwork. The argument was interrupted by a soft mewing sound from the surgical table. Hope was waking up, his tiny yellow eyes blinking in confusion as he tried to process his surroundings. The sound triggered an immediate response from outside Sage's answering call, desperate and joyful. September 14th, 2021, 11:47 p.m. Sarah's final moments had been peaceful, as much as dying could ever be peaceful for an 8-year-old. The machines had been turned off at her request. She'd been conscious enough to understand that there was no coming back from the massive brain bleed that had stolen her future. "Mom, are you going to be okay?" she'd whispered, her small hand barely able to squeeze Abby's fingers. "I don't know, baby girl. I honestly don't know." "You will be. God's going to send you helpers. They might not look like people, but they'll help you remember how to be happy again." Those had been Sarah's last coherent words before the morphine took her into whatever comes after living. At the time, Abby had dismissed them as the confused ramblings of a dying child. Now she wondered if Sarah had been more lucid than anyone realized. Present day, 12:00 p.m. Hope was fully awake now, weak but alert. His tiny voice called out in distress, and Sage's answering cry from outside was immediate and heartbreaking. The wild mother was still there, still waiting, her maternal devotion transcending every instinct that should have driven her to safety. "That's not normal bobcat behavior," Santos observed, her clipboard forgotten as she watched the interaction between inside and outside. "Nothing about this situation is normal," Bradley agreed. "But maybe that's the point." He turned to Abby with the expression of someone making a decision that would probably cost him administrative headaches for months. "Dr. Whitehorse, I'm going to recommend emergency classification for this intervention. You'll need to complete a full incident report, and we'll need to discuss long-term care options for both animals. Both animals. That mother bobcat isn't going anywhere without her adopted kitten. And based on what I'm seeing, they're both going to need specialized care that goes beyond standard wildlife protocols." Santos started to protest, but Bradley cut her off. "Maria, sometimes the law serves the spirit of conservation better when we bend it than when we break it. This is one of those times." As if responding to the shift in mood, the storm began to ease. The punishing rain softened to a steady patter, and through the clinic windows, the first hint of afternoon light penetrated the storm clouds. Abby looked down at Hope, then toward the door where Sage waited with the patience of absolute love. For the first time since Sarah's death, she felt the presence of something larger than grief, something that might actually be hope. Her daughter's impossible plan was working, orchestrated from beyond death with the faith of a child who believed that love could transcend any obstacle, even the grave itself. Present day, 2:00 p.m. The power went out just as Hope was taking his first tentative steps since surgery. One moment the clinic hummed with the reassuring sounds of modern medicine monitors beeping, oxygen concentrator cycling, heating system maintaining perfect temperature, and the next, everything fell silent except for the storm's relentless assault on the building. "Generators in the shed," Daniel said, moving toward the door. "I'll get it running." But when he tried the door handle, it wouldn't budge. The storm had warped the old wooden frame, or debris had blocked the exit. They were trapped inside with a critically injured kitten whose IV pump had just stopped working, whose oxygen supply was now dependent on whatever remained in the portable tank. "How long?" Abby asked, checking the tank's gauge with growing dread. "Maybe 20 minutes of oxygen? The IV medications?" She calculated quickly in her head. "Hope needs continuous pain management and antibiotics. Without the pump, I'll have to administer everything manually. And that's assuming his system can handle the irregular dosing." September 15th, 2021, 2:30 p.m. The call had come during Sarah's school science presentation. Abby remembered because she'd been scrubbing out between surgeries, thinking about how proud she was that her daughter had chosen to present about Oklahoma wildlife rehabilitation. Mrs. Patterson had been calling to tell her that Sarah's presentation had been so impressive that several parents wanted to schedule visits to Abby's clinic. "She's got real passion for this work. Dr. Whitehorse. Have you considered that she might follow in your footsteps?" Abby had smiled, planning to surprise Sarah with a special dinner to celebrate her success. She'd been mentally selecting the restaurant when her cell phone rang with news that would shatter everything. There'd been an accident on Highway 59. Sarah's bus had been hit by a drunk driver who'd run a red light at 60 miles per hour. The irony was crushing. Sarah had died returning from a presentation about saving injured animals. Her last academic achievement focused on the very work that now defined Abby's existence. Present day, 2:15 p.m. Without electricity. The clinic felt smaller, more primitive. Bradley and Santos had moved to the windows, trying to assess whether the storm was weakening enough for them to leave safely. But Daniel remained focused on the immediate crisis, using his cell phone's flashlight to help Abby work. "Talk to me about manual dosing," he said, understanding that keeping Abby focused on medical procedures was the best way to manage everyone's rising panic. "I'll have to calculate each injection based on his weight and metabolism. Too much morphine and I could suppress his breathing. Too little, and the pain could send him into shock." Her hands were steady despite the circumstances, drawing precise amounts of medication into syringes. "It's like walking a tightrope in the dark." Outside, Sage's calls had become more frequent and agitated. The wild mother could sense the crisis even through the clinic walls, her maternal instinct screaming that something was wrong with her adopted kitten. Hope seemed to understand the gravity of his situation, too. His tiny yellow eyes tracked Abby's every movement. And when she spoke to him in the gentle voice she'd once used with Sarah, his purring intensified a sound that should have been impossible for a critically injured animal. "He's fighting," Daniel observed. "Most animals would have given up by now." "Sarah raised him to be a fighter," Abby replied, then stopped, shocked by the certainty in her own voice. She hadn't intended to speak Sarah's name, hadn't planned to acknowledge the impossible truth that was becoming clearer with each passing hour. April 3rd, 2021, 7:45 a.m. 5 months before the accident. Sarah had asked a question that Abby now realized had been crucial. "Mom, what would you do if you found a baby animal that needed help, but helping it was against the rules?" Abby had been reviewing case files, distracted by the demands of running a busy rural practice. "Well, sweetheart, sometimes we have to make difficult choices between what's legal and what's right." "But what if the animal would die if you followed the rules?" Then I suppose you'd have to decide whether you could live with yourself for following rules that caused unnecessary suffering. Sarah had nodded gravely, as if filing away this conversation for future reference. At the time, Abby had assumed her daughter was thinking about injured birds or stray cats. She'd never imagined that Sarah was planning to raise a bobcat kitten in secret, or that she'd use her mother's own ethical framework to justify the decision. Present day, 2:45 p.m. The manual medication administration was working, but barely. Hope's vital signs remained stable, but Abby could see the strain on his small system. Each injection had to be perfectly timed and precisely dosed. One mistake could kill him. Santos had been making increasingly agitated phone calls, trying to coordinate with state emergency services. But the storm had knocked out cell towers across 3 counties, leaving them essentially cut off from outside help. "Dr. Whitehorse," she said, ending another failed call. "I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer." Abby looked up from preparing another injection. "Go ahead. Do you believe this situation was orchestrated? All of it, the timing, the storm, the equipment failures, because statistically, the chances of all these factors aligning are essentially impossible." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything rational people were supposed to believe about coincidence and causation. Bradley shifted uncomfortably, while Daniel's weathered face remained carefully neutral. "You want me to say that my dead daughter somehow arranged for a wild bobcat to bring me her secret pet during a power outage storm?" Abby's voice carried exhaustion and something else, a dangerous edge of acceptance. "I want you to tell me whether you think we're dealing with natural circumstances or something else." September 15th, 2021, 7:23 p.m. Sarah's last coherent conversation hadn't been about dying or saying goodbye. Instead, she'd insisted on giving Abby detailed instructions about caring for the animals around their property. "The raccoons by the creek have babies. They'll need extra food if it gets cold early. And Mom, there's a bobcat family living in the old oak grove. The mama is really smart. She'll bring her babies to you if they need help." "How do you know all this, sweetheart?" "I've been watching them, learning their habits. They're not just animals, Mom. They're individuals with personalities and families and feelings." At the time, Abby had attributed Sarah's detailed knowledge to childhood imagination. Now she understood that her 8-year-old daughter had been conducting sophisticated behavioral research, preparing for scenarios that would never come to pass. Or would they? Present day, 3:30 p.m. Hope's condition was deteriorating, despite Abby's careful medication management. His breathing had become labored again, and his body temperature was dropping. Without the electric heating pad and controlled environment, he was losing the battle against post-surgical complications. "We're losing him," Abby said quietly, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. Outside, Sage's calls had become desperate, a wild keening that spoke of loss beyond human understanding. The wild mother knew, with the instinct of her species, that her adopted child was slipping away. The impossible decision loomed before Abby like a cliff face: continue fighting with inadequate resources and watch Hope suffer, or ease his passing with enough morphine to ensure he felt no pain. It was the same choice she'd faced with Sarah, the choice that had haunted her for 3 years. "There's one more option," Daniel said quietly. "Something my grandmother taught me about the connection between animals and the people who love them. Santos started to protest, but Bradley silenced her with a look. What kind of option? Let Sage in here. Let her be with him. The suggestion violated every protocol about wild animal management, every safety regulation about human-wildlife interaction. But as Hope's breathing became more shallow and his tiny body grew colder despite their best efforts, conventional wisdom seemed increasingly irrelevant. That's insane, Santos said. A wild bobcat in an enclosed space with humans. The liability alone. The liability is mine, Abby interrupted, moving toward the door. And right now, I care more about honoring promises than protecting careers. As she reached for the door handle, thunder crashed overhead with such violence that the building shook. In that moment of atmospheric chaos, Hope's heart monitor flatlined, the steady beep replaced by the harsh tone that meant clinical death. But before despair could fully claim her, Abby heard something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the boundaries between life and death, between human and animal consciousness. Sarah's voice, clear as day, whispering through the storm. Let her in, Mom. Trust the love. The door opened, and Sage stepped into the clinic as if she'd been waiting her entire life for this invitation. Sage entered the clinic with the fluid grace of a predator, but there was nothing threatening in her approach. Her amber eyes immediately located Hope's still form on the surgical table, and the sound that emerged from her throat was unlike anything the humans in the room had ever heard. A keening cry that seemed to contain all the grief of every mother who had ever lost a child. The wild bobcat moved directly to the table, rising on her hind legs to peer at the tiny kitten who had flatlined 30 seconds earlier. Without hesitation, she began what could only be described as a revival ritual, gently nudging Hope's face with her nose while making soft chuffing sounds that seemed to call him back from whatever darkness had claimed him. She's trying to wake him up, Daniel whispered, his voice filled with awe. My grandmother always said animals understand death differently than we do. Santos stood frozen against the wall, her clipboard forgotten as she witnessed behavior that challenged everything she'd learned about wild animal psychology. Bradley had his hand on his radio but made no move to call for backup. Some moments transcended protocol. Then the impossible happened. Hope's heart monitor, which had been emitting that flat, hopeless tone for nearly a minute, suddenly resumed its steady beeping. The kitten's eyes fluttered open, and he made a tiny mewing sound in response to Sage's continued ministrations. Jesus Christ, Santos breathed. Is that normal? Can animals actually? Nothing about this is normal, Abby said, her voice shaking as she checked Hope's vital signs. His heartbeat was strong and regular, his breathing deep and unlabored. Whatever had happened during that minute of clinical death, he was now more stable than he'd been since the surgery. But the real shock came when Abby opened the hidden door in the clinic's basement, a door she'd kept locked for 3 years, because it contained Sarah's secret wildlife rehabilitation center. The room was exactly as her daughter had left it, dozens of carefully constructed habitats for injured animals, detailed charts tracking recovery progress, and medical supplies that an 8-year-old had somehow acquired through means Abby was only beginning to understand. But what stopped everyone cold was the wall of photographs, hundreds of images showing Sarah working with a remarkable variety of wounded creatures. My God, Bradley said, studying a photo of Sarah carefully feeding a baby deer with a bottle. How long was she doing this? According to these charts, Daniel said, examining Sarah's meticulous record-keeping. At least 2 years. Look at this, she was tracking migration patterns, documenting injuries, even performing basic first aid. And the photographs told a story that shattered Abby's understanding of her daughter's secret life. Sarah hadn't just been caring for Hope. She'd been running a sophisticated wildlife rescue operation from their basement, somehow managing to treat dozens of animals without her mother's knowledge. One photograph in particular made Abby's knees buckle. Sarah, looking impossibly young and serious, carefully stitching a wound on a large bobcat's shoulder. The cat in the image was unmistakably Sage, her distinctive ear notch clearly visible. "She saved Sage before I did," Abby whispered, the timeline crashing into focus. "The surgery I performed 3 years ago, I wasn't the first person to help her. Sarah had already treated her, already earned her trust." Santos was studying the medical charts with growing amazement. These treatment protocols are sophisticated. This 8-year-old was essentially practicing veterinary medicine, and based on these success rates, she was damn good at it. But the most devastating discovery was Sarah's journal. Found in a locked drawer that Daniel managed to open with a bobby pin, the final entries, written in the weeks before her death, revealed the full scope of her daughter's plans. September 10th, 2021. Hope is getting stronger every day. Mom still doesn't know about any of this, but I think she's ready to learn. I've been watching her get sadder since Grandma and Grandpa died. The animals make her happy even when she doesn't realize it. When I show her everything we've built down here, I think she'll remember why she became a veterinarian in the first place. September 12th, 2021. Something's wrong with my head today. I had a really bad headache during reading time, and Mrs. Patterson made me go to the nurse. I'm scared something might happen to me like what happened to Grandma and Grandpa. If it does, I hope Mom finds this room and understands that I learned everything from watching her. She's the best animal doctor in the world, even when she's too sad to see it. September 13th, 2021. I registered Hope in the pet database today. Mrs. Running Bear at the Heritage Center helped me figure out how to do it legally. If something happens to me, the registration will make sure Hope is protected and that Mom knows how much I love her and all the animals she's helped. I put Sage down as the emergency contact because she'll take care of Hope if I can't. Animals understand love better than people sometimes. The journal's final entry was dated September 14th, the day before Sarah's collapse. I dreamed about heaven last night. It was full of all the animals we've ever helped, and they were all healthy and happy. If I have to go there, I won't be sad because I know Mom will keep helping the ones who are still here. Hope is my gift to her so she won't forget that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to show itself. The room fell silent except for the sound of Hope's steady purring and Sage's gentle grooming of her adopted kitten. The wild mother had somehow known to bring him here, to this hidden sanctuary that represented the continuation of her beloved human child's work. She orchestrated all of this, Santos said, her regulatory mindset completely abandoned. An 8-year-old child created a fail-safe system to ensure her mother's healing, using wild animals as the delivery mechanism. Abby sank into Sarah's small chair, surrounded by evidence of her daughter's secret compassion. The guilt she'd carried for 3 years, the certainty that she'd failed as a mother, that she'd been too busy to truly know her child, crumbled in the face of this overwhelming proof of Sarah's love and wisdom. "I spent 3 years thinking I'd failed her," she whispered. But she was watching me, learning from me, becoming everything I'd hoped she could be. And when she knew she might die, she made sure I'd have a reason to keep living. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside, but the emotional tempest inside the clinic was just reaching its peak. Hope was recovering with remarkable speed, as if being reunited with Sage had triggered some profound healing mechanism. The wild mother never left his side, grooming him with the gentle devotion that had kept him alive through 3 years of wilderness survival. Bradley was photographing everything with his phone, documenting what would undoubtedly become the most unusual case in Cherokee Nation Wildlife Department history. Dr. Whitehorse, I have to ask, what do you want to do with this facility legally? We could classify it as an established wildlife rehabilitation center, especially given the documentation and success rates. You mean make it official? Sarah did everything right except get the proper permits. With your veterinary license and this established facility, we could retroactively authorize the operation. Make it legal. The possibility of continuing Sarah's work, of honoring her daughter's legacy while healing her own broken heart, felt like emerging from 3 years of winter into sudden spring. But there was still the question of Sage and Hope, whose story had become inextricably linked with their human family's journey toward healing. As if sensing the gravity of the decision, Sage looked directly at Abby and made the soft, chuffing sound that had become their private language of trust and understanding. In that sound, Abby heard an echo of Sarah's voice, felt the presence of love that transcends death, and understood finally that some gifts arrive through the most unexpected messengers. The basement wildlife hospital wasn't just Sarah's secret project. It was her daughter's final letter, written in the language of compassion and delivered by creatures who understood that healing comes in many forms. 6 months later, March 15th, 2025. The morning sun filtered through the new skylights Abby had installed in Sarah's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, casting rainbow prisms across the expanded facility that now bore an official plaque, the Sarah Elizabeth Whitehorse Memorial Wildlife Sanctuary, where love finds new ways to show itself. Hope bounded across the specially designed indoor habitat with the exuberant energy of a healthy 6-month-old bobcat, his once broken leg showing no trace of the injury that had nearly claimed his life. He'd grown into a magnificent young cat, his spotted coat gleaming with health. But it was his temperament that made him truly extraordinary. Unlike any wild bobcat on record, Hope seemed to understand that his purpose involved bridging the gap between human and animal worlds. Sage watched from her favorite perch by the window, her amber eyes tracking her adopted son's every movement with the satisfied pride of a mother whose child had exceeded every expectation. The wild bobcat had chosen to remain at the sanctuary, accepting the comfortable balance between freedom and security that Abby had worked so hard to create. During the day, she roamed the 40-acre property freely, hunting and maintaining her wild instincts. But every evening, she returned to the clinic, often bringing injured creatures she'd discovered during her travels. "Good morning, beautiful girl," Abby said softly, approaching Sage with the easy familiarity of their established friendship. The bobcat responded with her signature chuff, then deliberately walked to the feeding station where she'd left a small, injured raccoon kit during the night. This had become Sage's routine, serving as an unofficial wildlife scout, identifying animals in need and bringing them to the sanctuary for care. It was behavior that continued to baffle wildlife biologists. But Abby had learned to accept that some connections transcended scientific explanation. Emma arrived just as Abby was beginning her morning rounds, carrying coffee and the warm smile that had become more frequent since she'd moved back to Oklahoma to help with the sanctuary. The sisters had found their way back to each other through shared purpose, their relationship healed by the understanding that grief processes differently for everyone. "How's our star patient today?" Emma asked, nodding toward Hope, who was demonstrating his remarkable ability to remain calm while Abby examined the rescued raccoon. "Perfect, as usual. I swear that cat understands more about veterinary procedures than most of my students." Abby smiled, thinking about the veterinary technician training program she'd started, teaching young people to work with both domestic and wild animals using Sarah's compassionate protocols. The program had attracted attention from universities across the country. Dr. Rebecca Hayes had helped Abby formalize the curriculum, creating the first accredited program that combined traditional veterinary medicine with wildlife rehabilitation and animal behavioral therapy. Students came from as far as California to learn the techniques that Sarah had somehow intuited at 8 years old. Daniel knocked on the clinic door, his arms full of fresh vegetables from his garden. Since retiring from his ranger position, he'd become the sanctuary's unofficial groundskeeper and Abby's closest friend, a relationship that might someday become something more, but for now remained comfortably rooted in shared respect and understanding. "Morning, ladies. Got a special delivery from a very impatient donkey who insists his carrots aren't fresh enough unless they're picked at dawn." Daniel's easy humor had been one of the constants that helped Abby navigate her return to joy. The donkey in question was Ezra, a rescue animal who'd arrived at the sanctuary with severe trust issues and had somehow bonded with Hope in a friendship that delighted visitors and baffled animal behaviorists. The unlikely pair could often be found napping together in the afternoon sun, the large gray donkey serving as a living pillow for the young bobcat, as if summoned by the mention of his name. Ezra appeared at the clinic door, followed by their newest addition, a one-eyed hawk named Wisdom, who'd been hit by a car and could never fly well enough to survive in the wild. The hawk had attached himself to Daniel with fierce loyalty, riding on his shoulder throughout the day and serving as an unofficial greeter for sanctuary visitors. "The whole menagerie's here," Emma laughed, watching as Hope immediately abandoned his raccoon patient to greet his donkey friend. "Sarah would have loved seeing all of them together." "She does see them," Abby said with the quiet certainty that had replaced her years of doubt. "I feel her presence here every day, in every animal we help, in every life we save." The sanctuary's success had been immediate and overwhelming. Word spread quickly about the facility where wild animals sought help voluntarily, where recovery rates exceeded national averages, and where a unique therapy program used gentle bobcats and other rescued animals to help grieving children process their losses. That afternoon, Abby's favorite part of the week arrived story time with the children from the local pediatric grief counseling program. 7 children, ages 5 to 12, all dealing with the loss of parents, siblings, or grandparents, gathered in the sanctuary's education center while Hope and 3 other specially trained animals provided comfort and distraction. "Dr. Abby, will you tell us again about how Hope came to live here?" asked Marcus, a 6-year-old who'd lost his father in a farming accident. The boy had barely spoken when he'd first arrived at the sanctuary, but Hope's calm presence had somehow unlocked his voice. "Well," Abby began, settling into the comfortable rhythm of a story she'd told dozens of times. It starts with a little girl who loved animals so much that she spent her whole life learning how to help them. And when that little girl went to heaven, she made sure the animals would continue to help the people she loved. As she spoke, Hope moved quietly through the group, allowing the children to pet his soft fur while Sage watched from the doorway with benevolent approval. The wild mother had never shown aggression toward the children, seeming to understand that they, like Hope, needed special protection and care. "My mom is in heaven too," said Lucy, a 9-year-old whose mother had died of cancer. "Do you think she can see me with Hope?" "I think the people we love never really leave us," Abby replied, remembering Sarah's final words about helpers who might not look like people. "They find new ways to show us they're still caring for us, still watching over us." The children accepted this explanation with the wisdom that sometimes comes to those who faced loss too early. They understood, in ways that adults often couldn't, that love transcends physical presence, and that healing comes through connection rather than isolation. As the afternoon session ended and parents arrived to collect their children, Abby felt the familiar sense of completion that had replaced the emptiness of her grief. Each child who left smiling, each animal that recovered and returned to health, each visitor who found comfort in the sanctuary's peaceful atmosphere was a living testament to Sarah's enduring impact. That evening, as the sun set over the Oklahoma hills, Abby sat on the clinic porch with her extended family of humans and animals. Emma was inside finishing the day's paperwork. Daniel was securing the animal enclosures for the night, and the rescued creatures were settling into their evening routines. Hope appeared at her feet, no longer the dying kitten who'd arrived in Sage's mouth, but a healthy young cat who somehow understood that his role involved bringing comfort to others. He settled into Abby's lap with a contented purr, while Sage took her usual position nearby, always watching, always protective. "You know, Sarah," Abby said softly, speaking to the evening sky as she'd taken to doing, "I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. Love doesn't end when someone dies, it just finds new ways to show itself." A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes Daniel had hung from the porch eaves, their soft melody mixing with the evening calls of the wild creatures who'd made the sanctuary their home. In that moment, surrounded by the living proof of her daughter's love and wisdom, Abby felt complete for the first time since Sarah's death. The Cherokee saying her grandmother had taught her came back with new meaning. A good deed is never lost. He who sows courtesy reaps friendship, and he who plants kindness gathers love. Sarah had planted kindness in every creature she'd touched, and the harvest of that love continued to grow, season after season, blessing everyone who entered their shared sanctuary. As darkness settled over the hills and the first stars appeared in the clear Oklahoma sky, Abby understood that some gifts arrive through the most unexpected messengers. Some promises echo across time until they find their fulfillment. And sometimes the greatest healing comes from the simple act of opening your heart to love in all its wild and wonderful forms. The good Lord had indeed provided helpers when she needed them most, and those helpers would continue Sarah's work for generations to come, proving that love, once planted, grows eternal. You know, folks, sometimes life has a way of breaking us down so completely that we forget what it feels like to wake up with purpose. Maybe you've lost someone who meant the world to you, a spouse, a child, A dear friend who knew all your stories. Maybe you're sitting in a house that feels too quiet, wondering if your best years are behind you, if there's still meaning to be found in the days ahead. This story of Abigail and Sarah reminds us that love doesn't end when someone leaves us. It transforms, finds new ways to reach us, often through the most unexpected messengers. That bobcat mother didn't just bring a wounded kitten to Abigail's door, she brought a bridge back to joy, back to purpose, back to the truth that we're never too old to start again. Sometimes our greatest heartbreak becomes the foundation for our greatest healing. Sometimes the very thing that breaks us open is what lets the light back in. Your story isn't over, friend. There's still love to give, still lives to touch, still reasons to believe that tomorrow can be brighter than today. What unexpected messenger has brought healing into your life when you needed it most? Have you ever felt like someone you've lost was still guiding you through difficult times? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how love has found new ways to show itself in your life.